My name is Clara Montgomery, and I am 29 years old. Yesterday afternoon at our estate in Connecticut, my mother stood in front of 30 country club guests and introduced my siblings as triumphs. My sister was successful. My brother was brilliant. Then she placed a hand on my shoulder, smiled at a state senator, and said, "Clara is still working on it." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I smiled, took a sip of my lemonade, and stepped back into the shade of the rose trellis. I pulled out my phone, opened a secure administrative portal, and verified that my mother was actively hiding a 42-minute phone call from my grandfather. The same grandfather she had just sworn to a trust officer was too consumed by dementia to operate a television remote. By midnight, my family discovered that treating their cybersecurity analyst daughter like an incompetent disappointment was the fastest way to lose a $14 million estate. My brother panicked. My mother threatened to call the police. Before I tell you how I dismantled their entire high society illusion, welcome to Orange Vengeance. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoy seeing arrogant people face real consequences. Drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning of that garden party, so you can see exactly how the trap was set. It was late spring in Greenwich. The string quartet played Vivaldi near the stone fountain. Waiters carried silver trays of expensive champagne. My mother, Vivian, navigated the patio like a general inspecting troops. She wore tailored cream linen. She lived for these moments where social standing was measured quietly and underachievement was judged with polite pity. I watched my sister Audrey nod along to a conversation. She is a partner at a Manhattan public relations firm. Everyone saw her designer dress. I saw her rigid jaw and the way she gripped her champagne flute until her knuckles turned white. Her firm had lost 2 major accounts this quarter. She hid her panic under forced laughter. Then there was Spencer, 31 years old, a senior investment broker. He stood near the caterers in a bespoke navy blazer. Despite the cool breeze blowing off Long Island Sound, a thin layer of sweat coated his forehead. He laughed at a joke, but his eyes stayed locked on his phone. He tapped the screen every few seconds. That was when Vivian gathered her wealthy friends and delivered her little speech. She wanted everyone to know her bloodline produced greatness. Successful Audrey, brilliant Spencer, disappointing Clara. I walked away from this group and stood by the hydrangeas. 3 years ago, I upgraded the network infrastructure for the estate. I installed a commercial-grade mesh system and secured the routing protocol. I kept administrative access because they never thought to ask for the passwords. It was a habit of mine to monitor the traffic logs during these events. I liked parsing the data flow of our guests, but the anomaly on my screen had nothing to do with a guest. I filtered the inbound call logs from the estate voice over IP system. At 8:14 that morning, the main line received a direct connection. I recognized the origin number. It belonged to the secure landline installed in my grandfather Wallace and his assisted living suite. The duration read 42 minutes and 16 seconds. The receiving endpoint was Vivian and her private study. I stared at the glowing digits on my screen. Vivian had spent nearly an hour speaking with a man she claimed could no longer form a coherent sentence. She kept the communication a secret from everyone. I looked across the lawn at Spencer wiping sweat from his brow and checking his screen again. That 42-minute conversation had set something dangerous into motion. My mother and brother were making a play for the money. They just did not realize I had the entire digital map of their scheme in the palm of my hand. I left the garden party before the caterers brought out the dessert tiers. I did not say goodbye to my mother. She was busy pretending to be a matriarch of the year, and my absence was a relief to her anyway. I walked down the long gravel driveway of the Montgomery estate and got into my 5-year-old sedan. The drive back to my own apartment took 40 minutes. I watched the sprawling stone mansions of the Gold Coast fade into the rearview mirror. They were replaced by practical townhomes and commercial districts. My apartment is a modest 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a brick building. It is not featured in any architectural magazines. It does not have a view of the water, but the name on the lease is mine. Let me explain how money works in my family. When Audrey graduated with a communications degree, Vivian handed her the keys to a luxury loft in Tribeca. When Spencer landed his first job as a junior broker, his welcoming gift was a down payment on a sleek condo in Stamford. When I graduated with dual degrees in computer science and network security, I received a polite card and a framed photograph of the family dog. I spent the next 6 years working 60-hour weeks at a cybersecurity firm. I tracked digital threats for financial institutions. I analyzed malware signatures and prevented data breaches. I paid off $90,000 in student loans by myself. Every cent I possess came from my own labor. My family views my independence as a charming eccentricity. To them, I am just the family tech support. They think my job consists of resetting routers and plugging in television cables. That ignorance was about to become their greatest liability. I unlocked my front door and walked straight to my desk. I set my keys down and woke up my primary workstation. My setup consists of 3 monitors and a custom-built server tower humming quietly in the corner. I poured myself a glass of cold water and sat in the ergonomic chair. It was time to find out exactly what my mother was doing. I opened my terminal and accessed the secure tunnel I had established to the Montgomery estate network. People who live in 15,000-square-foot houses always want seamless internet coverage. 3 years ago, Vivian complained that the signal was weak near the pool. I spent a weekend tearing out their outdated commercial equipment and installing an enterprise-grade mesh network. I provisioned the routers. I configured the firewalls. I mapped the entire estate topology. And because I do not trust the people who share my DNA, I retained a hidden administrative backdoor. I pulled the raw data packets from the main router. I filtered the traffic by device recognizing the unique identifier for Vivian and her private office phone. The digital breadcrumbs were waiting for me. Numbers are beautiful because they cannot be manipulated by social pressure. They do not care about country club memberships. They only record actions. I reviewed the timeline. The 42-minute incoming call from Grandpa Wallace ended at 8:56 in the morning. I scanned the outbound traffic logs for the exact moment the connection severed. 2 minutes later at 8:58, Vivian used her landline to place an outgoing call. I ran a reverse lookup on the destination number. The result populated on my screen in stark white text: David Caldwell. David Caldwell is not just any attorney. He is a senior partner at a boutique law firm specializing in high-net-worth estate planning. He is also the executor of my grandfather and his legal trust. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the name. Vivian was moving pieces on the board. She had just spent an hour talking to a man she claimed was incapacitated. Then she immediately dialed the lawyer, who controlled his $14 million fortune. The narrative she was spinning for the trust officers was a fabrication designed to seize control of the assets before anyone else realized what was happening. My phone vibrated on the desk. The screen illuminated with a new text message. It was from Spencer. I picked up the device and read the incoming words. "Hey sis, quick favor. My firm is doing a server migration today and our internal network is down. I need to run a fast background check on a prospective client. Just standard due diligence. Can I borrow your security clearance login for the national database? I will be quick. Thanks." I read the message a second time. A cold precision settled in my chest. If you work in cybersecurity, you learn to recognize threat vectors. One of the most common vulnerabilities in any secure system is human error. Hackers use a tactic called social engineering. They manufacture a sense of urgency. They offer a plausible excuse. They leverage a familiar relationship to bypass standard security protocols. Spencer was executing a textbook social engineering attack on his own sister. He thought I was naive enough to hand over high-level governmental database credentials just because he asked nicely. He thought my job was a joke and my clearance was a toy. But his request revealed much more than his arrogance. It revealed his desperation. Investment brokers do not run their own background checks during network outages. They have compliance departments for that specific reason. Spencer did not need to vet a client. He needed deep hidden information. He needed to look up someone's financial history or legal standing, and he needed to do it without leaving a digital footprint tied to his own name. He wanted my credentials so that any unauthorized searches would be logged under my professional profile. If a federal audit flagged the search, I would lose my career and face criminal charges. Spencer was willing to destroy my life to cover his tracks. I placed my fingers on the glass screen and typed my response. No, Spencer. That violates federal compliance laws. Use your own compliance officer. I hit send. I did not add a smiley face. I did not soften the rejection with apologies. I simply delivered a closed door. 3 seconds later, my screen showed the typing indicator. It vanished, then it appeared again. Spencer was struggling to maintain his casual facade. His reply came through. Come on, Clara. Do not be dramatic. We are family. I just need a quick favor. Do not make a big deal out of this. I did not reply. Let him sweat. The pieces of the puzzle were locking together. Vivian was secretly contacting the estate lawyer. Spencer was trying to commit identity fraud to access restricted databases. They were acting like people who were suddenly running out of time. They were scrambling to secure the wealth they believed was rightfully theirs. They looked at me and saw a failure. They saw a quiet girl who stood by the hydrangeas and drank water while the important people talked. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my silence. I was not quiet because I lacked ambition. I was quiet because I was gathering data. My grandfather Wallace was a sharp man. He built a commercial real estate empire from a single warehouse. He taught me how to play chess when I was 7 years old. He always said that loud people tell you exactly what they are going to do, but quiet people are the ones who actually do it. If Vivian was lying about his mental decline, then Wallace was trapped in that assisted living facility, surrounded by people waiting for him to pass away. I reached for my car keys. I needed to know exactly what was said during that 42-minute phone call. My mother restricted his visitor access last month, claiming the stimulation was bad for his heart. She had instructed the front desk to turn away anyone without her explicit written permission. I did not care about her social rules. I was going to see my grandfather. The drive to Oak Haven takes 20 minutes. I navigate the winding coastal roads of Greenwich, with the windows rolled up and the radio off. Silence is the best environment for processing variables. The facility sits behind imposing wrought iron gates flanked by towering oak trees. It resembles an exclusive country club rather than a medical center. Manicured lawns stretch toward a private lake. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms wait beneath a stone portico. This is where wealthy families store their elders when they become inconvenient. They pay exorbitant monthly fees to ensure the facade of prestige remains intact, even in declining health. I hand my keys to the valet and walk through the automatic glass doors. The lobby smells like fresh lilies and floor wax. A young woman sits behind a vast mahogany reception desk. She wears a silk scarf and a practiced smile designed to soothe nervous relatives. I state my name and ask for Clara Montgomery in Suite 400. The receptionist taps her keyboard. Her smile tightens into a thin line. She informs me that Vivian Montgomery placed a strict visitor restriction on the suite just this morning. She states that only authorized medical personnel are allowed entry. I anticipated this barrier. I do not raise my voice. I do not argue or plead. I slide my driver license across the polished wood counter. I inform her that I am the designated secondary emergency contact on my grandfather and his medical file. I also mention that denying access to a registered family member without a court order constitutes unlawful isolation under state elder care statutes. I pull out my phone and offer to dial the State Health Compliance Board right now to verify her enforcement of an illegal verbal directive. The receptionist stares at me. Her corporate training did not prepare her for quiet legal threats delivered without emotion. She looks at my ID, then looks at the phone in my hand. She presses a button under her desk and slides a printed visitor badge across the counter. I pin the badge to my jacket and take the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway is dead silent. Thick carpets absorb the sound of my footsteps. Brass sconces cast a warm artificial glow against the wallpaper. I find Suite 400 and push the heavy oak door open. The room is bathed in bright afternoon sunlight. It smells of bergamot from a freshly brewed pot of Earl Grey tea. A brass mantel clock ticks with steady, rhythmic precision marking time in an otherwise still room. Wallace Montgomery sits in a high-backed leather armchair near the window. He wears a pressed tweed vest over a crisp white shirt. His posture remains rigid. His hands rest on the silver handle of a mahogany cane. He turns his head as I enter. His eyes are pale blue, sharp and piercing. There is zero fog in his gaze. "You took long enough, Clara." His voice is a gravel rasp, but his diction is flawless. I close the door and engage the deadbolt. I tell him I had to bypass Mother and her security protocol at the front desk. Wallace lets out a dry, abrasive laugh. He taps his cane against the hardwood floor. "Vivian always thought she could build walls out of paper," he says. "She thinks a signature on a clipboard can keep reality out of this room." I sit on the edge of the velvet sofa opposite his chair. I ask him directly about the phone call. I tell him I monitor the estate network logs. I know he spoke to Vivian for 42 minutes this morning. Wallace pours a cup of tea. His hands shake slightly with age, but he does not spill a single drop. He sets the porcelain teapot down. "I called your mother to deliver a reality check," he says. "She believes she can inherit my life and distribute it to your siblings like party favors. I informed her that I am restructuring my entire estate plan." He looks out the window at the rolling green hills. "I built a commercial real estate holding firm with dirt under my fingernails," he continues. "I read every contract. I inspected every concrete foundation. My wealth is built on tangible assets. Your mother and your siblings build their lives on vapor. They worship the reflection in the mirror rather than the person standing in front of it." Wallace turns his piercing eyes back to me. He tells me his former colleagues still send him market reports. He knows Audrey is drowning. Her public relations firm is hemorrhaging clients, and she secretly floats her lavish lifestyle on high-interest credit lines. He tells me Spencer is in even deeper water. Spencer leveraged his own properties to back a doomed hedge fund, and the margin calls are approaching fast. They bleed cash while buying new luxury cars just to maintain the illusion of success. "They view my estate as a rescue boat," Wallace says. "They think they can wait for me to pass away and use my money to patch the holes in their sinking ships." I told Vivian today that I am cutting the cord. The wealth will not go to people who pretend to be successful while rotting from the inside. This exposes the core wound of our family. Vivian raised us to prioritize social optics over genuine achievement. Audrey and Spencer traded their integrity for country club approval. They performed their wealth for an audience. I chose to work in the shadows writing code and securing data. They judged me for it. They considered my trade beneath their prestige. But Wallace sees the truth. He always has. He values the architect over the actor. Wallace reaches into the inner pocket of his tweed vest. He pulls out a thick, sealed envelope. The paper is heavy and unmarked. He holds it out to me. I take the envelope. It feels solid in my hands. I break the wax seal and slide the contents onto the glass coffee table. There is no cash. There are no paper deeds. A heavy black flash drive sits on the table. It features a biometric thumbprint scanner on the side, military-grade hardware designed to self-destruct if tampered with. Next to the drive is a single white index card. A complex alphanumeric decryption key is written in his steady block handwriting. "That drive contains my actual legacy," Wallace says. "Everything resides there. The operating agreements, the real estate portfolios, the offshore accounts, the exact ledgers of what I own and where it lives. It also contains the legal framework I instructed my attorney David Caldwell to draft." He leans forward, resting both hands on his cane. "Vivian is going to panic. She knows I am cutting them off. She will try to declare me incompetent. She will try to seize medical control. She will try to erase everything I have built and replace it with her own forged reality." I look at the encrypted drive. I understand exactly what he is handing me. This is not just wealth. It is a digital weapon. It is the immutable proof of his final wishes. "I need a steward, Clara. I need someone who understands how to protect information. Your siblings only know how to spend. You know how to secure." He points a weathered finger at the flash drive. "Take it home. Encrypt it behind your own firewalls. Lock it down tight. When I am gone, they will swarm like locusts. They will try to rewrite history to suit their narrative. I scoop the drive and the index card back into the envelope. I slide the package into the inner pocket of my jacket. I look my grandfather in the eye. I promise him I will protect his legacy against whatever Vivian tries to deploy. They will try to erase what I have built, he says. His voice drops to a harsh whisper. Keep the logs. I stand up and adjust my jacket. I tell him I will visit again tomorrow. He nods and turns his attention back to the window, watching the afternoon sun stretch across the lawn. The mantel clock continues its steady rhythmic ticking. I leave the suite and walk back down the silent hallway. My mind races with deployment strategies. I need to transport this drive to my home server. I need to run it through an isolated sandbox environment to ensure the encryption remains stable during extraction. I reach the lobby and walk past the receptionist. She avoids my gaze, pretending to organize paperwork on her desk. I exit through the glass doors and hand my ticket to the valet. As I wait for my sedan, my phone buzzes in my pocket. A calendar alert flashes on my screen. It is an automated notification from the online medical portal I configured for Wallace last year. A new document has just been uploaded to his file by an external physician. I open the attachment right there on the pavement. It is a preliminary psychiatric evaluation declaring Wallace Montgomery unfit to manage his own affairs. Vivian is moving faster than I anticipated. The war has officially begun. I drove back to my apartment with the uploaded psychiatric evaluation burning a digital hole in my phone. Vivian had fired her first shot in a war she did not understand. I needed to inspect my own arsenal before returning fire. I parked my sedan in the designated spot and walked up the stairs to my second-floor unit. I locked the deadbolt behind me and carried the heavy black flash drive to my workstation. I spent 6 years auditing network vulnerabilities for national banks. I know how data can be corrupted or intercepted. I treat information with the same reverence that my mother treats a country club invitation. The flash drive felt dense in my palm. It represented an entire lifetime of labor compressed into a few gigabytes of memory. I do not plug unknown hardware into my primary network regardless of who handed it to me. I retrieved a standalone air-gapped laptop from my hall closet. This machine has no wireless card and no Bluetooth capability. It is a sealed digital environment. I booted the system using a clean operating system running from a RAD-only terminal. I inserted the drive into the port. The biometric scanner on the side of the device glowed with a faint blue ring. The screen prompted me for a fingerprint or a master override sequence. I retrieved the white index card Wallace had given me at the assisted living facility. I typed the complex alphanumeric string into the command line. The decryption software initiated its algorithms. A progress bar marched across the screen in silence. When it reached 100%, a single directory opened. The contents were impeccably organized. My grandfather possessed a meticulous mind. Folder 1 contained financial ledgers dating back 4 decades. Folder 2 held commercial property deeds spanning the entire state of Connecticut. Folder 3 carried the label Estate Execution. I opened the third folder. A portable document file appeared on my screen. The header read, Irrevocable Digital Trust. I scrolled through the clauses. The legal architecture was flawless. Attorney David Caldwell had drafted a masterpiece of estate law. The document transferred all of Wallace and his holdings into this trust. The total valuation sat at $14 million in verified liquid assets and real estate. A specific clause named me, Clara Montgomery, as the sole successor trustee. The document was fully executed. It carried cryptographic timestamps and notarized digital signatures dated 3 days ago. An irrevocable trust cannot be altered or dissolved by anyone once it is executed. Not by a judge, not by a frantic daughter holding a forged medical document. By establishing this specific legal vehicle, Wallace had removed his assets from the traditional probate process. The courts would have no jurisdiction over the transition of wealth. Upon his passing, the $14 million would bypass the estate process entirely and vest directly under my control. Vivian was currently fighting a desperate battle for control of a kingdom that no longer existed in her name. A sharp knock at my front door interrupted the quiet hum of my server tower. I locked the air-gapped laptop screen and walked to the entryway. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Audrey stood in the hallway. My sister wore a tailored trench coat over a designer silk blouse, but her usual immaculate presentation was fractured. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy knot. Her mascara was slightly smudged beneath her eyes. Audrey never visits my apartment. She once referred to my neighborhood as quaint, which in Gold Coast vocabulary translates to impoverished. I opened the door and stepped back. Audrey pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. She paced the length of my living room. She wrung her hands together in a display of nervous energy. She launched into a performance of extreme vulnerability. The tears arrived right on cue, trailing down her cheeks. She sobbed about the current state of her public relations firm. She claimed the market was shifting and her clients were unfairly abandoning her roster. She said she was on the verge of losing the Tribeca loft Vivian had purchased for her 5 years ago. Audrey launched her public relations firm 3 years ago. Vivian funded the initial startup costs and leveraged her social connections to provide Audrey with her first roster of clients. Audrey threw lavish launch parties and paid for magazine features celebrating her entrepreneurial spirit. But a business built on nepotism fractures under the weight of actual market competition. I watched her pace across my hardwood floor. She was a woman trapped in a cage constructed of her own vanity. Then she delivered the pitch. She needed a bridge loan to cover her operating expenses until her next big account closed. The commercial bank required a co-signer with pristine credit and verifiable liquid assets. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. She told me I was the only person who could save her business. She invoked the family reputation. She said if her firm collapsed, the Montgomery name would become a high society punchline. She begged me to sign the paperwork and save our social standing. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a seat on my sofa. I simply stood by the kitchen island and observed her performance. I folded my arms and leaned against the granite counter. I told Audrey that banks do not require bridge loan co-signers for successful businesses. They require them for toxic liabilities. I reminded her that my pristine credit score was the result of living within my means. I paid off my own student loans while she was buying imported furniture for a loft she did not earn. I told her I found her request mathematically illogical. I recited the estimated operating costs of a boutique public relations firm in Manhattan. I cross-referenced those figures with her lifestyle choices. I pointed out that she leases a new Porsche every 2 years. She vacations in St. Bart's every winter. She wears shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. I told her that a person earning her reported tax bracket does not live that way without drowning in high-interest debt. You do not have a cash flow problem, Audrey, I said. You have a reality problem. You perform success instead of building it. I refuse to attach my financial identity to a sinking ship just to protect a reputation built on vapor. I will not subsidize your illusions. The transformation was instantaneous. Audrey stopped crying. Her posture straightened. The trembling in her hands ceased. The tears evaporated, leaving behind a cold, venomous glare. The mask of the desperate sister vanished, revealing the ruthless social climber underneath. You think you are so superior, she said. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You sit in this miserable little apartment and judge us. You are a glorified computer repair girl. You have no idea how the real world operates. You are going to regret turning your back on Blood Clara. When Mother secures control of the estate, we will make sure you get nothing. You will be erased. She turned and marched out of my apartment. The door slammed shut, rattling the picture frames on my wall. I locked the deadbolt again and walked back to my workstation. Audrey was right about one thing. The real world was about to operate very differently for the Montgomery family. I sat down to review the rest of the trust documents and map out my next move. But before I could open the next financial ledger, my phone illuminated with a new emergency notification. It was another automated alert from the assisted living facility medical portal. Vivian had escalated her timeline. The notification indicated an incoming medical directive. The game was moving faster than I expected. The notification flashing on my secondary monitor originated from the Oak Haven patient management system. I built a custom application programming interface for my grandfather last year to ensure his medical records remained centralized and secure. The facility administrators thought I was just a helpful granddaughter, configuring a convenient dashboard for the family. They did not realize I hard-coded myself as the super user with root access to the entire back-end server. Every viewed file, every downloaded chart, and every uploaded document triggered a silent ping to my private server. Vivian was moving her pieces across the board. I clicked the alert and accessed the encrypted payload. The document was a scanned file. The header displayed the letterhead of a private concierge medical practice in Westport. The title read, Declaration of Severe Cognitive Impairment. I scrolled down the page. The clinical notes described Wallace as suffering from advanced dementia, disorientation, and an inability to comprehend complex financial or legal decisions. The bottom of the page bore the signature of Dr. Richard Preston. Dr. Preston does not practice traditional medicine. He operates a boutique concierge service for the Connecticut elite. Wealthy families pay a $50,000 annual retainer for his private mobile number. He provides discretion and convenience. If a hedge fund manager needs a discreet recovery treatment, after a long weekend, Dr. Preston arrives with specialized equipment. If a prominent socialite needs an unrecorded prescription for anxiety medication, Dr. Preston writes the script without asking uncomfortable questions. He is a high society fixer wearing a white coat. Vivian had purchased a diagnosis. She intended to submit this fraudulent evaluation to a judge to activate a medical power of attorney. Once that document took effect, she would possess the legal authority to rewrite my grandfather and his estate plan. She wanted to route the $14 million back into her own accounts before he passed away. Most people would react to this betrayal with outrage. A normal daughter might call her mother and scream into the receiver. She might drive to the country club and cause a scene in the dining room. I do not engage in theatrical confrontations. Emotion is a vulnerability that your enemies can leverage against you. Data is a weapon that never misses its target. I minimized the document and opened my command line interface. I needed to prove the evaluation was a fabrication. A medical diagnosis requires a patient examination. If Dr. Preston had evaluated Wallace, there would be a digital footprint. I queried the Oak Haven Visitor Management Database. The facility requires every guest and external physician to scan a government-issued identification card at the front desk. The system logs the entry time, the departure time, and the specific suite visited. I ran a search for Dr. Richard Preston, covering the past 90 days. The query returned 0 results. He had not set foot on the Oak Haven campus. Next, I accessed the patient portal access logs. If a physician writes a diagnostic report on a patient, they must review the medical history. I filtered the server traffic for the credentials assigned to Dr. Preston. The database confirmed his account had never been activated. He had never viewed a single blood test chart or daily nurse report regarding my grandfather. Finally, I extracted the metadata from the medical document itself. The file contained hidden information detailing exactly when and where it was created. The authoring software stamped the creation time as 2 hours ago. The geolocation coordinates embedded in the file did not point to a medical clinic in Westport. The coordinates matched the exact latitude and longitude of the Greenwich Country Club dining terrace. Vivian and Dr. Preston had crafted a fraudulent medical document over expensive salads and sparkling water. I highlighted the server logs, the visitor registry query, and the document metadata. I packaged the raw data into an encrypted archive file. The story the data told was undeniable. Dr. Preston had signed a legal declaration of incompetence for a man he had not seen or treated without ever reviewing a medical chart. That is not just professional malpractice. That is a felony. But exposing the corrupt doctor was only half the battle. I needed to establish an immovable defense for Wallace. If Vivian submitted her forged document to a probate court, it could trigger a lengthy legal injunction. The court might freeze the estate and force a messy litigation process. I had to preemptively crush her strategy before she even reached the courthouse steps. I picked up my phone and navigated to my encrypted contacts. I dialed the direct number for Dr. Elias Thorne. Dr. Thorne is a board-certified neurologist affiliated with a premier research hospital in New York. He does not attend garden parties in Connecticut. He does not accept retainers for convenience. He deals strictly in peer-reviewed science and empirical evidence. He answered on the second ring. I explained the situation with clinical detachment. I informed him that a hostile family member was attempting to seize control of my grandfather using fraudulent medical documentation. I needed an independent, ironclad neurological evaluation conducted immediately. I requested a comprehensive cognitive assessment including specialized memory testing and a full psychiatric workup. Dr. Thorne agreed to clear his schedule for a private consultation. I arranged for him to conduct the initial interview via a secure telehealth connection later that evening, followed by an in-person visit to Oak Haven the next morning. I wired his consultation fee from my personal savings account, ensuring no financial traces touched the family accounts. Later that night, I established the secure video link between Dr. Thorne and the tablet in my grandfather and his suite. I watched the session from my own monitor in my apartment. Wallace sat in his leather armchair answering every question with razor-sharp clarity. He recited dates, performed complex mental arithmetic, and articulated his legal wishes with perfect diction. Dr. Thorne spent an hour putting him through rigorous cognitive stress tests. Wallace passed every single metric with flying colors. The following morning, Dr. Thorne arrived at Oak Haven. I had pre-authorized his entry through the portal, ensuring Vivian remained entirely unaware of the visit. The neurologist spent another 2 hours conducting physical and neurological exams on site. By noon, he uploaded a 20-page certified report to my secure server. The conclusion was unequivocal. Wallace Montgomery possessed exceptional cognitive function. He demonstrated full situational awareness and held the explicit mental capacity required to execute legal documents. Dr. Thorne included a recorded video appendix of the assessment and stamped the report with his digital signature and medical license number. I now possessed a loaded weapon. On one side, Vivian held a flimsy single-page document signed by a country club doctor who had never met the patient. On the other side, I held a comprehensive certified evaluation from a leading neurologist backed by server logs proving the fraud. I dragged the new medical report into the same encrypted folder as the digital trust. I organized the files meticulously. I built a chronological timeline mapping every move Vivian had made since the garden party. The snare was woven tight. All I needed was the right moment to pull the cord. I closed the directory and locked my workstation. I walked into my small kitchen to brew a cup of black coffee. The silence of my apartment felt different now. It was no longer the silence of exclusion. It was the quiet anticipation of a predator waiting for the prey to step onto the marked target. My phone vibrated against the granite counter. The screen lit up with a new text message. I picked it up and read the sender name. It was Vivian. The message was brief and lacked her usual polished warmth. Clara, please come to the estate tomorrow evening at 7 for a family dinner. Spencer and Audrey will be here. We need to discuss the future of your grandfather and his care plan. Do not be late. I read the words twice. Vivian never invited me to family dinners unless she needed a prop or a scapegoat. She certainly never sought my opinion on care plans. She believed she held the winning hand with her forged medical document. She wanted to gather her children in the formal dining room to announce her new status as the medical proxy and sole arbiter of the Montgomery wealth. She intended to use the dinner to force my compliance. She thought she could intimidate the quiet cybersecurity analyst into stepping aside while she pillaged the estate. She was setting an ambush inside the very house I had hardwired for data extraction. I tapped the glass screen and typed a 2-word reply. I confirm. I set the phone down and picked up my coffee mug. Vivian was going to serve me an ultimatum on a silver platter. She had no idea she was inviting the executioner to the feast. I arrived at the Montgomery estate precisely at 7 in the evening. The wrought iron gates swung open upon recognizing the transponder on my windshield. The gravel driveway crunched beneath my tires as I navigated the winding path toward the main house. The mansion loomed against the twilight sky. Ground-level spotlights illuminated the stone facade, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. I parked my vehicle next to the leased Porsche belonging to Audrey and the polished sedan belonging to Spencer. They were already waiting inside. The heavy oak front door opened before I reached the top step. A member of the domestic staff stood aside to let me enter. The grand foyer smelled of lemon polish and expensive floral arrangements. Vivian waited for me near the entryway. She wore a silk blouse and a cashmere cardigan draped over her shoulders. Her smile was tight and practiced. She did not offer a greeting or a hug. She simply turned and instructed me to follow her to the formal dining room. That detail alone confirmed the nature of this gathering. We never utilized the formal dining room for casual family meals. It was a space designed specifically for intimidation. The room featured a long mahogany table positioned beneath a cascading crystal chandelier. Heavy velvet drapes blocked the windows, preventing any outside light from softening the atmosphere. The environment was constructed to make a guest feel small and compliant. Spencer sat on the right side of the table. Audrey occupied the left. The staff had placed plates of catered salmon and roasted asparagus at each setting, but no one held a fork. The food was merely a prop for an event that had nothing to do with dining. The tension in the air felt dense enough to snap. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table facing my mother. Vivian bypassed the customary small talk. She offered no pleasantries regarding my day or my drive from the city. She gave a slight nod to Spencer. My brother cleared his throat and reached down to his leather briefcase resting on the floor. He retrieved a thick stack of legal paper bound in a blue jacket. He slid the documents across the polished wood surface until they rested inches from my plate. Spencer built his entire career on the illusion of complexity. He compensates for a lack of actual financial acumen by burying his clients in esoteric terminology. He memorizes spreadsheets and regurgitates buzzwords. It works perfectly on the country club circuit because nobody wants to admit they do not understand the mechanics of their own portfolios. Wealthy clients nod politely and hand over their assets rather than appear uneducated. He clearly expected the same tactic to work on his younger sister. He adopted his professional broker voice. He claimed the family needed to be proactive regarding our grandfather and his declining health. He stated that the documents in front of me were standard asset protection waivers. He leaned forward and began throwing around terms designed to confuse and overwhelm. He spoke of fiduciary consolidation and estate tax mitigation. He mentioned probate shielding and unified proxy delegation. He insisted that by signing these forms, we would streamline the legal process and protect the family wealth from government interference. He produced a silver pen and placed it on top of the blue folder. He told me it was just a routine formality to keep the state out of our private business. I did not touch the pen. I pulled the stack toward me and opened the cover. My eyes bypassed the bold headings and dived directly into the dense paragraphs of the fine print. People always hide their true intentions in the clauses nobody bothers to read. I scanned the legal architecture. The wording was exceptionally precise and undeniably predatory. I located the operative clause on page 4. It was not an asset protection waiver. It was a comprehensive renunciation of rights. The legal language explicitly stated that by affixing my signature, I would legally forfeit any current or future claim to the estate of Wallace Montgomery. The subsequent pages granted Vivian unchecked medical and financial authority over his remaining days. Furthermore, the document designated Spencer as the primary proxy for all investment accounts, effectively handing him the keys to the vault. They were asking me to sign away my inheritance so they could liquidate the assets and cover their own mounting debts. I closed the folder. I looked across the table at Spencer. The thin layer of sweat had returned to his forehead, glistening under the chandelier. I told him his use of the term fiduciary consolidation was legally inaccurate in this context. I stated that the document in front of me was a voluntary renunciation of inheritance. I pushed the folder back across the mahogany surface. I informed them I would not sign it. Audrey slammed her hand against the table. Her wine glass rattled, spilling a few drops of red liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. She leaned forward and accused me of being selfish. She claimed I was trying to steal their legacy. She said I had no idea how much pressure they were under to maintain the family image in our social circles. Her phone buzzed next to her plate, a constant reminder of the creditors she was ignoring. I ignored her outburst. Audrey operates on pure emotion, and I do not negotiate with emotion. Vivian held up a single finger. Audrey fell silent instantly. My mother shifted her strategy. She abandoned the facade of a concerned parent managing a tragedy. The refined Connecticut matriarch vanished. The ruthless social operator took her place. Vivian built her social standing by knowing exactly what leverage to pull and when to pull it. She had once ruined a local politician simply by withholding an invitation to a summer gala, isolating his family from crucial campaign donors. She wields her contacts like a weapon. She looked at me with cold, unblinking eyes. She reminded me that she sits on a philanthropic board with Richard Vance. Richard Vance happens to be the chief executive officer of the cybersecurity firm where I am currently employed. I had spent 6 years climbing the ranks of that company, working gruelingly long hours to establish my reputation in a male-dominated industry. Vivian knew how much my independence meant to me. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. She outlined her threat with quiet clarity. She said one phone call from her would flag me as a security risk. She promised to tell Richard that I was experiencing a severe mental breakdown. She would claim I was attempting to extort my own family and acting erratically due to financial stress. In my industry, stability is paramount. A single whisper of erratic behavior from a prominent society figure would trigger an immediate internal audit. She promised my security clearance would be suspended by morning. She guaranteed my career would be over before the end of the week. She sat back and waited. She expected me to crumble. She expected the fear of losing my livelihood to break my resolve and force compliance. My siblings watched me closely. Spencer looked relieved, thinking the heavy artillery had won the battle. Audrey offered a smug smile, believing my independence was about to be crushed beneath the weight of our mother and her influence. I looked at the unsigned papers. I looked at Spencer sweating in his expensive suit. I looked at Audrey gripping her wineglass to hide her trembling hands. Then I looked directly into my mother and her calculating eyes. I knew something they did not know. I knew the irrevocable trust was already executed and sitting on a secure server in my apartment. I knew they were threatening me over an estate they had already lost. I reached out and slid the blue folder an inch further away from me. I held my mother and her gaze, holding the silence until the tension in the room became suffocating. Then I spoke 3 words: make the call. I left the formal dining room without waiting for a response. My mother remained frozen in her chair. Spencer stared at the blue folder. Audrey refused to meet my eyes. I walked out the front door and handed my valet ticket to the staff. The drive back to my apartment required precise navigation through the dark Connecticut roads. I did not turn on the radio. The threat to destroy my career hung in the cabin air, but I felt no fear. Vivian operates on social currency, and scandal is the one currency she cannot afford to spend. Calling my chief executive officer to rant about a family dispute would expose her own desperation. She would never make the call. It was a bluff designed to force compliance. I entered my apartment and secured the deadbolt. I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my workstation. The time for passive monitoring had expired. I needed to map the exact dimensions of the battlefield. I woke the air-gapped laptop and input the alphanumeric decryption key from the index card. The biometric scanner accepted my thumbprint. The directory materialized on the screen. I opened the folder containing my grandfather and his financial ledgers. Wallace kept meticulous records. He logged every commercial lease, every property tax payment, and every dividend yield. I pulled up the primary asset registry. I needed to see what Spencer was trying to steal. My brother is a senior investment broker, but his title is a shield for incompetence. He survives by managing portfolios for our mother and her country club associates. They trust the Montgomery name and rarely ask for detailed quarterly breakdowns. Spencer uses their capital to project an image of financial genius. I initiated a deep audit of the real estate holdings. I ran an automated script to cross-reference the parcel identification numbers against the state municipal property database. I was looking for unauthorized inquiries or recent encumbrances. The script analyzed 50 distinct commercial properties. 10 minutes later, the command line flagged an anomaly. A premier commercial building located in downtown Hartford showed a recent alteration in its title history. The property is a 12-story office complex, generating reliable rental income for the estate. According to the county clerk database, a commercial lien had been recorded against the deed just 14 days ago. I accessed the public records portal and downloaded the digitized filing. The document was a commercial loan agreement. The principal amount read $2 million. The collateral was the Hartford building. The borrower listed on the contract was Wallace Montgomery. I zoomed in on the signature block. A digital signature claiming to be my grandfather rested on the bottom line. Below it, the paperwork cited a durable power of attorney authorizing the transaction. The designated agent acting on behalf of the borrower was Spencer Montgomery. I scrutinized the digital certificate attached to the signature. Every electronic signature generates metadata, identifying the Internet protocol, address the device signature, and the exact timestamp of execution. The metadata tied to this contract traced back to an Internet service provider in Stamford. It mapped directly to the registered address of Spencer and his condominium. My brother had forged a legal document. He fabricated a power of attorney to convince a regional bank he had the authority to encumber a highly valuable asset. I needed to follow the capital. $2 million does not just sit in a checking account. I used the routing numbers embedded in the loan disbursement schedule to track the wire transfer. The funds bypassed my grandfather and his accounts entirely. The money flowed into a corporate holding entity registered in Delaware. I breached the public registry for the Delaware entity. The holding company acted as a shell for a boutique hedge fund operating out of Manhattan. I recognized the fund name. It was the exact venture Spencer had been boasting about at the garden party. He claimed he was launching an exclusive investment vehicle for high-net-worth individuals. The truth painted a much darker picture. Spencer was not attracting new investors. His hedge fund was hemorrhaging cash. He had made catastrophic trades on leveraged margin accounts, and the market had moved against him. The brokers were calling in their debts. If he defaulted, the regulatory agencies would audit his firm and discover his negligence. To prevent his own professional ruin, Spencer stole $2 million from his grandfather. He committed federal wire fraud. I sat back and processed the magnitude of the crime. The entire Montgomery family illusion was currently floating on stolen money. The bespoke suits, the leased luxury vehicles, the catered garden parties were all financed by a criminal act. Spencer secured the loan, but Vivian clearly knew about the maneuver. That was why they ambushed me with the blue folder. They needed me to sign the renunciation waiver to prevent me from ever looking at the estate finances. If I relinquished my rights, I would have no legal standing to audit the property deeds. Their secret would remain buried under a pile of legal jargon. They thought they were playing a local game of family politics. They did not realize they had stepped into federal jurisdiction. I opened a secure encrypted communication channel. I did not use a standard email client. I utilized a virtual private network and an end-to-end encrypted messaging protocol. I typed the email address for David Caldwell. David Caldwell is an old-school legal tactician. He does not attend social galas or seek public recognition. He operates from a quiet office featuring dark wood paneling and leather-bound volumes of case law. Wallace trusted him because David values precision over pretense. I drafted a concise message. I introduced myself as the successor trustee, named in the irrevocable digital trust. I informed him that I possessed the encrypted biometric drive. Then I attached the evidence. I sent the downloaded loan agreement, the fraudulent power of attorney, the digital signature metadata, and the routing numbers tracing the $2 million wire transfer to the failing hedge fund. I hit send and waited. Less than 5 minutes later, my secure phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but I knew who was on the other end. I accepted the call. A deep, calm voice spoke my name. Attorney David Caldwell did not waste time with pleasantries. He confirmed receipt of the encrypted files. He told me he had spent the last hour reviewing the timestamps and the metadata. He recognized the severity of the situation immediately. He asked if my family knew I possessed the trust documents. I told him they believed I was ignorant and compliant. I explained the ambush at the formal dining room and their attempt to force my signature on a renunciation waiver. David let out a low, steady breath. He informed me that the forged power of attorney was a fatal error. He explained that Spencer had exposed himself to a multitude of criminal charges, including bank fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The regional bank that issued the loan would face severe penalties for failing to conduct proper due diligence. The bank executives would be forced to turn on Spencer to save their own federal charters. We formulated a strategy. We would not file a police report tonight. We would not alert Spencer to his impending destruction. If we struck too early, he might attempt to move the funds offshore or destroy the physical evidence at his condominium. We needed to let him feel secure. We needed him to believe his plan had succeeded. David instructed me to draft a comprehensive forensic report. I needed to package every network address, every login attempt, and every fraudulent digital certificate into an undeniable dossier. He would prepare the legal injunctions and coordinate with his contacts in the probate court. We were constructing a trap that would spring shut with lethal precision. We agreed to detonate the evidence at the exact moment my family felt the most invincible. They worshipped their social standing. They believed their reputation shielded them from consequence. We would tear that shield away in front of their peers. I terminated the call and began compiling the dossier. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I extracted packet data. I generated hash values to prove the files had not been altered. I built a chronological timeline of the theft, mapping every step from the forged signature to the offshore holding account. The digital ledger offered no mercy. It recorded the truth in binary code. My brother was a thief, and my mother was his accomplice. As I finished compiling the final forensic report, my phone screen illuminated with a harsh red alert. It was not a text message from a sibling. It was a critical priority notification from the Oak Haven Assisted Living Medical Portal. The system monitoring my grandfather and his vital signs had just triggered a life support protocol. The timeline for our strategy was about to compress drastically. The red alert flashing across my phone screen dictated an immediate shift in protocol. I grabbed my keys and sprinted down the staircase of my apartment building, ignoring the cold night air hitting my face. The drive to Oak Haven took 16 minutes. The roads were devoid of traffic, allowing me to push my engine past the legal limits. I did not care about municipal speed enforcement or traffic citations. The man who taught me how to secure my own future was rapidly running out of time. I pulled into the facility parking lot with my tires gripping the damp asphalt. The valet stand was empty, and the exterior lights cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. The glass doors parted silently as I stepped into the dimly lit lobby. The night shift staff moved with hushed urgency. A charge nurse recognized my face and nodded toward the elevator without asking for my visitor badge. She knew the protocol for final hours. I walked into Suite 400. The room smelled of sharp antiseptic and aged linen, replacing the familiar warm scent of bergamot tea. The brass mantel clock continued its steady rhythmic ticking, indifferent to the failing biology resting in the center of the room. Wallace lay in the mechanical bed. The monitors beside him tracked a slowing, irregular pulse. I pulled a heavy wooden chair to his side and took his hand. His skin felt cool and paper-thin beneath my fingers. When I was 10 years old, my grandfather gave me a disassembled radio and told me to figure out how the components communicated. While Vivian dressed Audrey in expensive pageant gowns and paraded her in front of country club judges, Wallace taught me the architecture of logic. He showed me that every system has a foundation, and every foundation can be protected if you understand the structural load. He never judged me for preferring soldering irons over silver spoons. He opened his eyes one final time. The pale blue irises found my face in the dim lighting. He did not speak, but the pressure of his fingers against my palm communicated everything necessary. He was handing over the watch. He was trusting me to hold the line against a family that viewed his legacy as a checking account. At 2:14 in the morning, the monitor flatlined. The rhythmic beeping turned into a solid, continuous tone. The nursing staff entered quietly to confirm the time of passing and document the medical charts. I remained in the chair holding his hand. The emotional weight pressed down on my chest, but a profound clarity cut through the grief. The exact second my grandfather took his last breath, a seismic legal shift occurred in the state of Connecticut. The fraudulent power of attorney my mother and brother conspired to use expired instantly. A power of attorney dies with the principal. It holds zero legal weight the moment a heart stops beating. Simultaneously, the irrevocable digital trust stored on my encrypted home server activated with binding authority. The $14 million estate no longer belonged to Wallace Montgomery. It belonged to the trust. I was now the sole legal custodian of the empire. I sat in the quiet room for 3 hours before Vivian arrived. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale gray light across the facility grounds. My mother walked through the heavy oak door wearing a meticulously selected black cashmere wrap over a dark silk blouse. Her presentation was flawless, conveying the exact image of a dignified, grieving matriarch. She did not rush to the bedside. She did not reach out to touch her father. She paused near the doorway, surveying the room to ensure the nursing staff was watching her performance. She brought a pristine white tissue to her eye, dabbing a tear that did not exist. Then she immediately pivoted toward the charge nurse holding a clipboard near the door. Vivian lowered her voice, adopting a tone of urgent sorrow. She informed the nurse that she needed the official death certificate expedited immediately. She claimed the family required the documentation to initiate the funeral arrangements and secure the estate properties against unauthorized access. I watched her from the shadows of the corner chair. Her demand for the death certificate was a tactical maneuver. She needed the physical document to march into the regional bank and present her forged medical proxy alongside the death notice. She intended to freeze the accounts under her own name before any competing claims could be filed. She wanted to cement her authority before the ink on the medical chart dried. She treated her father passing away as a logistical hurdle to be cleared on the path to liquidation. The charge nurse politely explained that the attending physician needed to sign the death certificate and the county clerk would issue the formal document within 48 hours. Vivian gripped her designer handbag until her knuckles turned white. Her jaw clenched tight. She offered a gracious nod, hiding her frustration behind the veneer of a patient mourner. She stepped out into the hallway to make a phone call. I followed her quietly, standing just inside the threshold of the suite. Vivian did not dial a number. She opened her messaging application. My peripheral vision is trained to catch rapid digital movements. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers type a brief text message. The recipient was Spencer. The message contained 4 words. The hurdle is gone. She hit send and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She genuinely believed she had won the war. She believed the fraudulent commercial loans Spencer secured would now be buried under her newly acquired executor status. She thought the $14 million would soon cover the margin calls on the failing hedge fund and pay off the credit lines keeping Audrey afloat in Manhattan. She was already spending the money in her mind. I stood in the doorway and said nothing. I did not correct her assumptions. I did not reveal the forensic dossier sitting on my secure server detailing every forged signature and illegal wire transfer. I did not tell her that the regional bank she planned to defraud was about to receive a federal injunction. In cybersecurity, you never interrupt an intruder while they are isolating themselves in a honeypot. You let them download the decoy files. You let them celebrate their false victory. You allow them to lock the digital doors from the inside, ensuring they cannot escape when you finally trigger the alarm. Vivian walked back into the room and offered me a condescending glance. She told me to go home and rest, claiming she would handle the complicated adult matters regarding the estate. I nodded silently, picked up my jacket, and walked past her. The silence of the morning wrapped around me as I exited the facility and walked to my sedan. The Montgomery family was preparing a grand celebration of their stolen wealth. They had no idea they were sending out invitations to their own funeral. The memorial service took place 3 days later at a private cemetery in New Canaan. The sky offered a uniform canopy of pale gray clouds, matching the somber tone my mother orchestrated. Vivian wore a tailored black dress and a veil that cost more than my monthly rent. She stood beside the mahogany casket, accepting quiet condolences from state judges and banking executives. She performed the role of the devastated daughter, with flawless grace, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, precisely when the cameras from the local society pages pointed in her direction. I stood 4 rows back behind a cluster of distant cousins and corporate acquaintances. Vivian had dictated the seating chart the night before. She placed Spencer and Audrey in the front row, flanking her like royal guards. They were the heirs apparent stepping into the light. I was a footnote pushed into the shadows. I watched the polished wooden box descend into the earth. I did not shed tears in front of the crowd. I had already said my goodbyes in the silent hours of the morning when nobody else cared enough to be there. The reception followed at the primary residence in Fairfield. The house features rich wainscoting and original stained glass windows, casting colorful prisms across the hardwood floors. Before the catering staff even finished clearing the silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, Vivian was walking through the main hallway with a prominent local architect. I stood near the bay window, drinking sparkling water and listening to their conversation. She pointed toward a load-bearing wall separating the dining room from the parlor. She discussed tearing it down to create an open-concept floor plan and replacing the hardwood with imported Italian marble. My grandfather had not been in the ground for a full afternoon, and she was already planning the demolition of his history. She walked past me holding a crystal glass of mineral water. She did not make eye contact. She gestured for a caterer to collect my empty plate, treating me like an invisible member of the serving staff. She was measuring the drapes for a house she did not own and treating the true legal custodian as an unwanted guest. I absorbed the microaggression in silence. I did not remind her that she possessed zero authority over the drywall she was planning to destroy. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway drew the attention of the guests on the patio. Audrey arrived at the reception driving a pristine slate gray Porsche Carrera. She stepped out of the driver's seat and tossed the keys to a valet hired specifically for the event. 3 weeks prior, my sister had paced across my living room floor begging for a bridge loan to save her failing public relations firm. Today she wore a triumphant smirk and a pair of diamond earrings that caught the afternoon light. The lease agreement for a high-performance vehicle requires a steep initial payment and proof of substantial liquid reserves. Audrey was spending the ghost of an inheritance. She walked up the stone steps holding a glass of Pinot Noir. She paused just long enough to inspect my dark, tailored shift dress. She offered a pitying shake of her head. She leaned in close and whispered that I should use whatever small stipend the estate might throw my way to buy a wardrobe that did not look so depressing. I thanked her for the fashion advice. I did not mention that her new sports car was financed by a fraudulent commercial lien. Inside the drawing room, Spencer held court. He grasped a tumbler of expensive scotch and spoke loudly to a circle of men wearing custom suits. He boasted about elevating his status at the Greenwich Country Club. He claimed he had just wired the initiation fee for the executive tier. That exclusive bracket requires $250,000 up front. He bragged that his new hedge fund venture was attracting serious institutional capital. He was projecting extreme liquidity to the room. In the financial sector, perception dictates reality. If investors believe you possess vast cash reserves, they trust you with their own portfolios. Spencer was using the stolen $2 million to build a mirage of limitless wealth. He spotted me standing near the doorway. He raised his tumbler in a mocking toast and offered a condescending wink. He felt untouchable. He believed his forged signatures and wire transfers were safely buried under the dirt of the cemetery. I retreated to my apartment that evening and locked the deadbolt. I did not intervene during the reception. I watched them gorge themselves on stolen pride. I pulled the digital logs from the estate servers one last time. The tracking data confirmed my hypothesis. The spending spree was accelerating rapidly. I ran a passive scan on their open network devices. The digital exhaust of their purchases painted a clear picture of reckless consumption. They were converting fraudulent collateral into visible status symbols. They were locking themselves into financial commitments they could never sustain once the ledger zeroed out. They were wrapping the rope around their own necks and pulling it tight. 2 days later, a courier arrived at my apartment building. He handed me a thick ivory envelope bearing the Montgomery family crest. Inside rested an invitation printed on heavy cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. Vivian was hosting the annual spring charity gala at the estate that coming weekend. The event historically served to raise funds for a coastal preservation society. It was a staple of the Connecticut High Society calendar. This year, however, the wording on the invitation indicated a dual purpose. The evening would formally celebrate the launch of Spencer and his new financial management group. Vivian was orchestrating a public coronation. By launching the firm in front of 300 elite guests, she intended to cement their social dominance permanently. The guest list would undoubtedly include the very banking executives who processed the forged commercial loan. She was intertwining their social standing with their financial crimes on a grand public stage. She included a handwritten note on the back of my invitation. The ink strokes were elegant and sharp. She wrote that she expected me to attend and behave appropriately. She suggested I stay near the perimeter and allow my brother to shine. She wanted me there as a prop to demonstrate her magnanimity. She wanted to show her friends that she still cared for her disappointing daughter. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I navigated to the custom digital response portal listed at the bottom of the card. I checked the box confirming my attendance. I typed my name into the registry and pressed the enter key. I felt the pressure building inside the architecture of their scheme. They were throwing a lavish party on a foundation of digital quicksand. They wanted an audience. They wanted influential witnesses to marvel at their triumph. They craved the spotlight more than anything else in the world. I intended to give them exactly what they asked for and ensure the spotlight burned brightly when the entire structure collapsed. I closed my laptop and prepared to contact the estate attorney. The time for quiet observation had officially ended. I drove to Hartford early the next morning to meet with attorney David Caldwell. His office occupied the third floor of a historic brownstone near the state capitol. It lacked the glass and steel pretense of the modern corporate firms favored by my brother. The space featured dark mahogany walls, lined with leather-bound volumes of case law. David Caldwell did not waste money on aesthetic intimidation. He built his reputation on airtight contracts and quiet victories. I sat across from him at a broad wooden desk. He wore a simple gray suit and possessed the calm demeanor of a man who rarely encountered a surprise he could not dismantle. He poured 2 cups of black coffee and opened a thick file containing the digital evidence I had transmitted earlier in the week. We reviewed the timeline of my family and their escalating fraud. David presented a disturbing update. His paralegal had monitored the probate docket and detected movement at Vanguard Coastal Bank. Vanguard Coastal is a regional financial institution tailored specifically for the Connecticut elite. The bank manages generational wealth for the Gold Coast families. The executives sit on the same philanthropic boards as my mother. They sponsor the same regattas and attend the same country club dinners. David explained that Vivian and Spencer had walked into the main branch yesterday afternoon. They submitted the forged medical proxy and the fraudulent power of attorney. They requested an immediate liquidation of the $14 million estate portfolio. They instructed the bank to transfer the total sum into a newly established corporate holding account controlled entirely by Spencer. Under normal circumstances, a transaction of that scale triggers a rigorous compliance audit. The Fraud Prevention Department would mandate an independent verification of the medical proxy. They would cross-reference the signatures with the primary account holder. They would require a waiting period. But in the aristocratic ecosystem of Greenwich, a familiar last name operates as a skeleton key. The bank executives were waiving the standard security protocols. They were pushing the paperwork through the underwriting department, relying on their social relationship with Vivian as collateral. They prioritized cocktail party etiquette over financial compliance. The transfer was scheduled to clear when the market opened on Monday morning. If those funds hit the holding account, Spencer would instantly wire the money to cover his failing hedge fund margins. Reclaiming the capital would require years of federal litigation and navigating offshore jurisdictions. The window for containment was shrinking rapidly. David pulled a legal pad from his drawer. He suggested filing a standard emergency injunction immediately to freeze the assets before the end of the business day. He wanted to halt the bank executives in their tracks through a direct phone call from his office. I shook my head. I took a sip of the dark coffee. I told him a quiet legal notice would allow Vivian to spin the narrative. She would claim a clerical error occurred. She would portray me as a jealous, estranged daughter causing administrative delays. She would use her social capital to maintain her pristine image, while her lawyers quietly negotiated a settlement behind closed doors. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward David. I showed him the embossed invitation to the spring charity gala. I explained the dual purpose of the event. Vivian was not just hosting a fundraiser. She was orchestrating a public coronation for Spencer and his new financial venture. I pointed to the guest list projected on the venue website. The roster included the senior vice president of Vanguard Coastal Bank. The very men facilitating the fraudulent transfer would be standing in the Montgomery ballroom, drinking vintage champagne and celebrating their lucrative new partnership with my brother. I proposed a different timeline. I asked David to prepare the emergency injunction and the formal contest of the medical proxy. But instead of filing the paperwork today, I instructed him to submit the documents to the probate court at exactly 4 p.m. on Friday. David studied the screen. A slow understanding dawned in his eyes. He is a veteran of estate law and recognized the mechanical precision of the strategy. The state judicial system operates on an automated batch processing schedule. Documents submitted late on a Friday afternoon sit in a digital queue. The clerks process the final batch just before closing. The system requires several hours to index the files and push the updates to the public registry. The banking compliance software constantly scrubs the public registry for liens and injunctions against high-net-worth clients. By timing the submission for late Friday, the automated legal freeze would hit the public registry and trigger the banking alerts on Saturday evening. We synchronized our watches. The injunction would become active and immutable at exactly 6 o'clock on the night of the gala. The bank executives would receive the automated compliance alerts directly to their secure mobile devices while standing in my mother and her drawing room. The trap would snap shut in front of 300 influential witnesses. David leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He agreed to the timeline. He drafted the motions linking the true irrevocable digital trust to the court filing. We sealed the legal architecture. The $14 million would be locked behind a judicial wall, just as the champagne corks popped. I left Hartford and returned to my apartment to prepare the physical weapon. Digital evidence requires a tangible delivery system when confronting people who worship appearances. A flash drive can be ignored or thrown away. Paper demands attention. I purchased a heavy manila folder. I connected my secure server to a high-resolution laser printer. I extracted the most damning pieces of forensic data and printed them on thick stock paper. The weight of the pages felt substantial in my hands. Document 1 was the unredacted, irrevocable digital trust, bearing my grandfather and his cryptographic timestamp and the signature of David Caldwell. It proved my sole legal authority over the estate. Document 2 contained the network traffic logs from the medical portal. I highlighted the visitor registry proving the concierge doctor had never set foot inside the assisted living facility. I included the metadata from the forged medical proxy pinpointing the exact coordinates of the country club where Vivian authored the lie. Document 3 was the kill shot. It displayed the digital signature audit trail from the $2 million commercial loan. The page featured the Internet Protocol address linking the forged signature directly to the Stamford condominium owned by Spencer. I included the wire transfer routing numbers, mapping the stolen capital to his failing hedge fund. I arranged the pages in sequential order. I placed them inside the manila folder and closed the cover. The package contained no threats and no emotional appeals. It held only binary truth translated into ink. The remainder of the week moved with agonizing slowness. I continued my daily routines at the cybersecurity firm, running vulnerability scans on client networks, while a much larger breach loomed on my own horizon. I ignored 3 text messages from Audrey detailing the designer gown she planned to wear. I ignored a voicemail from Vivian, reminding me to arrive early and stay out of the photographs. They were marching toward a precipice entirely unaware of the missing bridge. Saturday arrived with the cool coastal breeze pushing off the water. I spent the afternoon preparing my attire. I bypassed the bright colors and ostentatious jewelry favored by the Gold Coast socialites. I selected a tailored charcoal column dress with a high neckline and long sleeves. It was the uniform of an observer rather than a participant. I pulled my hair into a strict knot at the nape of my neck. I applied minimal makeup. I did not want to project celebration. I wanted to project an impending audit. I stood by my front door and checked my watch. The time read 5:15 in the evening. The automated court system was currently indexing the injunction. The data packets were moving silently through the municipal servers, updating the financial registries across the state. The gears of consequence were turning. I picked up my clutch and tucked the heavy manila folder under my arm. The paper felt like a loaded weapon. I walked down the stairs to my sedan and started the engine. The drive to the Montgomery estate would take 40 minutes. The bank executives were already arriving. My brother was preparing his toast. My mother was standing by the fountain ready to accept the admiration of her peers. They had built their entire lives around the performance of prestige. Tonight, I would force them to read the reviews. I surrendered my sedan to a valet wearing a white jacket and crisp black trousers. He looked at my practical 5-year-old vehicle with a brief flicker of confusion before masking it behind professional courtesy. The driveway of the Montgomery estate resembled a showroom for imported European engineering. Bentleys and custom Mercedes sedans lined the circular drive, waiting to deposit the elite of Connecticut onto the cobblestone walkway. I stepped out, holding my small clutch and the heavy manila folder. The evening air carried the scent of expensive perfume and blooming jasmine, masking the salt of the nearby Sound. Vivian had transformed the rear gardens and the grand ballroom into a theater of wealth. Strings of warm white lights hung suspended from the ancient oak trees, creating a canopy of artificial starlight. A towering ice sculpture shaped like a majestic sailing ship dominated the center of the patio, flanked by twin champagne towers flowing with vintage crystal. 300 of the most influential political and financial figures in the state mingled on the terrace. They wore tailored tuxedos and bespoke evening gowns. The women displayed generational diamonds that caught the ambient light, casting small prisms across the stone pavers. A 12-piece orchestra played a soft symphony near the Rose Garden, providing the perfect acoustic backdrop for networking and subtle corporate espionage. I barely crossed the threshold of the grand foyer before Vivian materialized. My mother possesses an uncanny radar for anything that might disrupt her curated aesthetic. She wore an emerald silk gown that swept the polished marble floor. A pearl choker rested against her collarbone. Her smile was radiant for the benefit of a state senator standing 10 feet away, but her eyes remained cold and calculating as they locked onto me. She glided across the room and hooked her arm through mine. Her grip was tight enough to bruise my skin through the fabric of my dress. She guided me smoothly away from the main entrance and toward the dimly lit corridor leading to the catering kitchens. She inspected my charcoal column dress with a swift, dismissive glance. Her eyes flicked down to the manila folder in my hand. She assumed it contained work from my office, a pathetic attempt by the tech girl to look busy at a social event. "Try not to look so miserable, Clara," she whispered, leaning close so only I could hear. Let your brother have his night. Do not ruin this with your usual sulking. I did not pull my arm away. I did not defend my wardrobe or explain the contents of the folder. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life measuring my worth against a country club ledger. I offered her a polite, shallow smile. I told her I would stay out of the way and let Spencer claim exactly what he deserved tonight. Vivian released my arm, satisfied with my apparent submission. She signaled a passing waiter and plucked a glass of iced lemon water from his silver tray, handing it to me as a silent command to remain sober and compliant. I accepted the water and turned away from the grand staircase, heading toward the perimeter of the ballroom. The room buzzed with the low hum of money seeking more money. I walked past the velvet-roped sections reserved for high-tier donors. I spotted Audrey holding court near the ice sculpture. She wore a backless crimson dress and laughed loudly at a joke told by a prominent Manhattan real estate developer. I paused near a pillar and watched her perform. Audrey was weaving a narrative about her public relations firm landing a lucrative international account. The developer nodded, looking impressed by her false confidence. I knew her firm was operating on a skeletal staff and struggling to make payroll. She was drinking top-tier champagne while standing on the edge of personal bankruptcy. The sheer audacity of her performance was almost impressive. She lived entirely in the present moment, ignoring the financial abyss waiting for her on Monday morning. Her ability to lie with a bright smile was a survival mechanism she inherited directly from Vivian. A woman dripping in sapphire jewelry bumped into my shoulder as she stepped back from a conversation. She spilled a drop of her wine onto the floor. She glanced at me, expecting an apology for standing in her way. I simply stepped aside and allowed her to move past. These people navigated the world believing the sea would part for them. They operated without the fear of consequence. I continued my slow perimeter walk. My target was not Audrey. I needed visual confirmation on Spencer and the banking officials. I found them near the grand fireplace on the far side of the ballroom. Spencer wore a custom-tailored velvet dinner jacket. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch. A circle of older, distinguished men surrounded him. I recognized the faces from the corporate dossiers I had researched earlier in the week. To the left of Spencer stood Arthur Kensington, the senior vice president of Vanguard Coastal Bank. Arthur was a pillar of the old money establishment. He inherited his position and protected it by catering to the whims of the ultra-wealthy. He wore a traditional tuxedo and possessed the relaxed posture of a man who believed rules applied only to the lower tax brackets. Beside him stood the chief underwriting officer for the bank, sipping a martini and nodding enthusiastically at my brother. These were the men who had bypassed federal compliance protocols to expedite a $14 million transfer because Vivian invited their wives to charity luncheons. They traded financial security for social proximity. Spencer beamed with the glow of a man who believed he had outsmarted the world. He clapped Arthur on the shoulder. They shared a laugh that echoed over the classical music. Spencer was thanking them for their swift assistance with the estate transition. He spoke about his new hedge fund, using terms like aggressive market positioning and leveraged liquidity. He was pitching his doomed financial venture to the very men he was currently defrauding. I watched Arthur Kensington raise his glass in a toast to Spencer and his bright future. The underwriting officer smiled and shook my brother by the hand. That handshake sealed a $2 million commercial loan backed by a forged signature. I stood in the shadows of a large potted fern, holding my manila folder against my side. I observed the precise mechanics of a fraud occurring in plain sight. They were exchanging pleasantries over stolen capital. The boldness required to stand in a room full of peers and accept congratulations for a felony was staggering. Spencer possessed zero anxiety regarding his actions. He believed his mother had neutralized the only threat when she forced the false medical proxy. He assumed my silence meant defeat. I glanced at the grand antique clock standing near the ballroom entrance. The brass hands indicated the time was 5:45 in the evening. 15 minutes remained until the automated probate servers pushed their daily updates to the public registry. 15 minutes until the compliance algorithms at Vanguard Coastal Bank scanned the new judicial filings and triggered the emergency alerts on the mobile devices resting in the pockets of those executives. The orchestra shifted to a brighter tempo, signaling the approach of the evening announcements. Waiters circulated through the crowd, offering fresh glasses of champagne to ensure every guest had a drink for the upcoming toasts. Vivian glided toward the small stage erected near the fireplace. She patted her hair and checked her reflection in a mirrored tray held by a passing server. She was preparing to take the microphone and anoint her golden sun in front of the entire Gold Coast society. I took a slow sip of my iced water. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass. I adjusted my grip on the manila folder. The stage was set, and the actors were hitting their marks, unaware that the script had already been rewritten. The orchestra concluded their symphony with a final graceful sweep of the strings. A gentle hush settled over the grand ballroom as waiters retreated to the edges of the room, holding their silver trays against their sides. The low murmur of wealthy networking faded into expectant silence. Spencer walked toward the small raised platform near the stone fireplace. He adjusted his bespoke velvet jacket and stepped up to the clear acrylic podium. He tapped the microphone twice, testing the audio feed. The sharp sound echoed across the marble floor, commanding the attention of 300 influential guests. He held a crystal flute of vintage champagne in his right hand. The stage lights caught the facets of the glass, reflecting tiny prisms onto his confident face. He looked out over the crowd of state politicians and banking executives with the posture of a man who had conquered his world. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Spencer began, his voice projecting smooth, polished charm. "We gather this evening to support the Coastal Preservation Society, but we also gather to celebrate transitions. The Montgomery family has always believed in building for the future. Tonight marks the launch of my new financial management firm. This venture represents our commitment to growth and our dedication to securing wealth for the next generation." He raised his glass higher. The liquid gold shimmered under the chandeliers. "I propose a toast," he said, "to family legacy and to new beginnings." The crowd responded with a polite murmur of approval, raising their own glasses in unison. Arthur Kensington, the senior vice president of Vanguard Coastal Bank, stood in the front row, beaming with pride. The chief underwriting officer stood beside Arthur, raising his martini glass toward my brother. They were toasting a financial visionary. They did not know they were toasting their own regulatory destruction. Spencer lowered his glass and smiled warmly at the audience. He gestured toward the front tables. "I cannot embark on this new chapter without the pillars of my life," he said. He invited Vivian and Audrey to join him on the stage. My mother glided across the polished floor in her emerald silk gown. She moved with the practiced elegance of a woman who had spent decades mastering the art of public adoration. Audrey followed closely behind her, wearing the backless crimson dress funded by high-interest debt. They stepped onto the platform and flanked Spencer, forming a perfect tableau of Gold Coast prestige. Spencer handed the microphone to Vivian. She grasped the slim metal cylinder and looked out over her kingdom. "I am so incredibly proud of my children," Vivian said. Her voice resonated with practiced warmth echoing through the cavernous ballroom. "They possess such remarkable drive. Spencer is launching a firm that will redefine market strategies. Audrey continues to expand her public relations empire, shaping the narratives of Manhattan. They are brilliant and they embody the true spirit of the Montgomery name." She paused, letting the applause wash over the stage. The guests clapped politely, acknowledging the genetic and social superiority Vivian was projecting. She scanned the crowd, letting her eyes drift over the senators and the corporate donors. Then her gaze shifted toward the shadows near the potted ferns. She found me standing alone in my dark charcoal dress. Vivian offered a slow, condescending smile. It was a facial expression designed to communicate pity mixed with triumph. She wanted me to know that my quiet rebellion meant nothing. She wanted me to witness my brother claiming the throne she had stolen for him. She believed her forged medical documents and stolen capital had secured this victory forever. I held her gaze. I did not blink. I did not look away. I simply waited. I glanced at the antique brass clock standing near the ballroom entrance. The ornate minute hand clicked forward, aligning perfectly with the 12. The time was exactly 5 minutes past 6 in the evening. In the digital realm, a court injunction does not arrive with sirens or flashing lights. It arrives as a silent packet of data routed through municipal servers directly into corporate compliance mainframes. The software protecting the federal banking charters never sleeps. It scans the public judicial registries every minute of every day, searching for frozen assets and legal liabilities tied to high net worth accounts. At 6 and 5 minutes, the automated systems at Vanguard Coastal Bank ingested the emergency probate filings submitted by attorney David Caldwell. The algorithms matched the Social Security numbers and the corporate entity tags. The system recognized that a $14 million portfolio currently pending transfer was now locked behind a severe judicial freeze. The software detected the attached fraud flags regarding the forged commercial loan. The banking protocol executed its immediate emergency directives. Down in the front row, Arthur Kensington shifted his weight. His tuxedo jacket vibrated. The chief underwriting officer standing next to him reached into his trouser pocket as his own device began to buzz frantically. Across the ballroom, 3 other junior executives from the same financial institution pulled their phones from their jackets. I watched Arthur unlock his screen. The polite smile on his face dissolved in a fraction of a second. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He stared at the encrypted compliance alert flashing across his display. The text informed him that his premium client was currently under federal investigation for wire fraud, and that the bank was holding a forged power of attorney. Arthur looked up from his screen and stared directly at Spencer. The admiration in the banker eyes vanished, replaced by stark, unfiltered terror. The chief underwriting officer bumped into a waiter spilling his martini across the marble floor. He was typing frantically on his device, trying to connect with his legal department. The quiet ripple of panic began to spread through the front rows as the executives realized their careers were tethered to a criminal sitting on the stage. Spencer did not notice the shifting dynamic in the crowd. He was too busy posing for the society photographer hired to document the gala. Vivian was still smiling at the audience, basking in the glow of her imagined triumph. The trap had snapped shut. It was time to show them the teeth. I stepped out from the shadows of the fern. I walked down the central aisle of the ballroom, moving with steady, measured steps. My charcoal dress blended into the muted lighting, but my pace drew the attention of the surrounding guests. I held the heavy manila folder tightly against my side. I did not run. I did not show anger. I moved with the cold precision of a ledger balancing itself. The crowd parted as I approached the front of the room. Arthur Kensington took a step backward as I passed him, his hands trembling around his phone. I reached the edge of the stage. I did not use the small wooden stairs situated on the side. I simply lifted my foot and stepped directly onto the low acrylic platform, bypassing the designated entry point. My sudden appearance shattered the curated tableau. Audrey gasped and took a step back, her crimson dress swishing against the floor. Spencer frowned, his false confidence faltering as he processed my intrusion. "What are you doing?" he hissed, covering the microphone with his palm. "Get off the stage." Vivian lost her polite smile. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Clara," she whispered sharply, "stop this right now." I ignored them. I walked directly to the clear acrylic podium. I raised my hand and placed the thick manila folder onto the slanted surface. The heavy paper slapped against the plastic, creating a sharp, cracking sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. I reached forward and pulled the microphone from Vivian in her grasp. She was too stunned to resist. Her fingers yielded the metal cylinder. I turned to face my brother. The sweat on his forehead was no longer a symptom of a warm room. It was the physical manifestation of his impending ruin. He stared at the manila folder, recognizing the weight of documentation. I lifted the microphone to my lips. My voice projected clear and steady across the room, reaching every politician, every donor, and every terrified banking executive in the crowd. "Legacy requires ownership, Spencer," I said. The words hung in the crisp evening air, slicing through the remaining pretense. "You do not own anything." I released the microphone, letting it rest in the cradle of the podium. The silent tension in the ballroom stretched to its breaking point, waiting for the contents of the folder to spill into the light. The event space remained suspended in a breathless vacuum. 300 guests stared at the raised platform, watching the collision of two divergent worlds. The curated elegance of the Gold Coast was crashing into the unforgiving reality of forensic data. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The microphone amplified the rustle of the thick paper as I opened the manila folder on the clear acrylic surface. Spencer stood paralyzed. His jaw tightened and his eyes darted toward the exit. He recognized the layout of the top document instantly. It was the commercial loan agreement he had signed to float his doomed investment vehicle. I turned my attention away from my brother. My target was the front row, where the architects of this fraud were currently suffocating in their tailored tuxedos. I looked directly at Arthur Kensington. I stated that the $2 million loan processed by Vanguard Coastal Bank was secured using a forged proxy. I slid the second document across the lectern. I read the electronic timestamp printed on the audit report aloud. I detailed how the signature was executed at an Internet Protocol address registered to my brother and his Stamford condominium. I specified the date and time, proving the document was created exactly 3 days after our grandfather formally revoked all prior medical and financial permissions. Arthur wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief. The chief underwriting officer beside him gripped his mobile device like a life preserver. I continued reading from the ledger. I mapped the flow of the stolen capital. I explained how the funds bypassed the estate accounts entirely and routed straight into a Delaware shell corporation. I named the failing hedge fund. I exposed the margin calls. I laid bare the illusions Spencer had sold to the crowd. He was not a financial visionary launching a premier wealth management firm. He was an incompetent broker drowning in debt, trying to patch the hull of a sinking ship with stolen timber. Spencer realized his charm could not override the forensic evidence. He tried to laugh it off, initially offering a weak chuckle and dismissing the documents as a misunderstanding. The echo of his laugh died in the silent room. He looked at the printed routing numbers and the digital signature metadata. The binary truth offered no loopholes. He had forged a legal document across state lines using electronic infrastructure. He was calculating the federal sentencing guidelines in his head. The sweat on his forehead dripped onto his velvet lapel. The crowd shifted, murmuring in low, shocked tones. Vivian stepped forward, attempting to snatch the folder from the podium. I simply placed my hand flat over the pages, securing them in place. That was when a figure detached from the shadows near the grand staircase. Attorney David Caldwell walked down the center aisle. He wore his usual gray suit, looking decidedly out of place among the designer gowns and vibrant tuxedos. He does not frequent charity galas. He builds his career on quiet competence and unassailable contracts. His presence in the ballroom served as a final execution order for the Montgomery facade. David reached the front of the room and stood beside the bank officials. He introduced himself to the crowd and stated his credentials as the legal executor for Wallace Montgomery. His voice carried the resonant authority of a man who held the keys to the kingdom. He confirmed that the documents on the lectern were authentic. He announced that my grandfather had established an irrevocable digital trust holding the entirety of his $14 million estate. He informed the silent audience that Vivian possessed zero authority over the assets. He stated clearly that Clara Montgomery was the sole successor trustee and the only individual with the legal right to manage the wealth. Vivian unraveled. The polished Connecticut matriarch vanished entirely. She gripped the microphone stand and shouted into the crowd. She claimed I was lying. She called David a fraud. She pleaded with the state senators and the corporate donors to ignore the accusations. She spun wild tales of a jealous daughter trying to ruin a beautiful family celebration. She leaned on her decades of hosted luncheons and charity board memberships, hoping her social currency could purchase a reprieve from the facts. She performed her outrage with frantic energy, painting herself as the victim of a cruel manipulation. The performance failed. In our world, social standing is a powerful shield, but it shatters instantly upon contact with federal financial crimes. Arthur Kensington did not look at Vivian. He did not offer her a sympathetic nod or a promise to sort things out quietly. He turned his back on the stage. The chief underwriting officer followed his lead. They walked briskly toward the terrace doors, holding their phones to their ears. They were already dialing their compliance departments and federal regulators, attempting to insulate their institution from the fallout. Their rapid departure signaled the end of the Montgomery reign. Audrey stood frozen near the ice sculpture. The crimson dress that symbolized her triumph now looked like a target. Her public relations firm relied on the perception of stability. Clients do not hire publicists embroiled in grand larceny scandals. She watched the influential guests mirroring the bank executives. The senators, the real estate developers, the hedge fund managers were all stepping away from the stage, creating a physical void around my family. The social quarantine was immediate and total. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I did not feel the fiery satisfaction of revenge. I felt the cold, clinical resolution of a balanced equation. I had spent my life observing these people building their egos on borrowed prestige. They treated my silence as a defect. They dismissed my profession as manual labor for the digital age. They failed to understand that a cybersecurity analyst spends every working hour hunting anomalies. I hunt the spaces where the data does not match the narrative. My family was a walking anomaly. David produced his own briefcase. He withdrew certified copies of the trust execution and handed them directly to the remaining reporters and society photographers near the front row. He provided the immutable proof to the very people tasked with documenting the gala. He ensured the true narrative would hit the morning papers before Vivian could deploy her crisis management teams. He methodically dismantled their safety nets. The whispers began to ripple through the crowd like a rising tide. In the enclaves of Connecticut, old money, a ruined reputation, is far worse than an empty bank account. The guests who had eagerly accepted Vivian and her hospitality moments ago were now reevaluating every interaction they ever shared with her. Wives of local politicians leaned together, murmuring about the implications. Corporate investors who had previously considered funding Spencer and his venture were mentally deleting his contact information. The Montgomery name was disintegrating in real time. The string quartet had long since packed away their instruments. The caterers stopped passing the silver trays. The grand ballroom transformed from a celebration into a crime scene. I retrieved the manila folder from the acrylic surface. I stepped down from the platform, leaving my mother and brother standing alone in the harsh glare of the stage lights. They had invited the elite of the Gold Coast to witness their coronation. I simply provided the correct script for the evening. I walked down the central aisle, the same path I had taken to approach the stage. The attendees parted before me. They did not offer pity. They offered the cautious respect reserved for someone who had just demonstrated lethal precision. I did not smile or gloat. I held my posture straight, keeping my gaze fixed on the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. I was the underachieving daughter, the disappointment standing by the hydrangeas. Now I was the only person in the room holding the deed to the estate. The social execution was swift and clean, built entirely on the immovable foundation of truth. Monday morning arrived with the sterile clarity of a forensic audit. The weekend had provided the judicial system and the financial sector enough time to digest the raw data I exposed at the charity gala. When the markets opened at 9 o'clock, the consequences began to crash down upon my family with the weight of concrete. They had operated under the assumption that their pedigree granted them immunity. They forgot that the federal government does not care about country club memberships when electronic wire fraud is involved. The first strike hit Spencer. My brother always believed that white-collar transgressions were resolved through quiet negotiations and regulatory fines paid from corporate accounts. He viewed the law as a suggestion for the wealthy and a boundary for the poor. That illusion shattered at exactly 9:15 in the morning. 4 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived at his luxury condominium in Stamford. The agents did not call ahead to schedule an appointment. They did not care that he was wearing a silk robe and sipping imported coffee. Because the $2 million commercial loan was executed digitally across state lines, routing the capital to a Delaware holding company, The crime fell under strict federal jurisdiction. Interstate wire fraud carries mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. The agents confiscated his laptop, his encrypted phone, and his custom leather briefcase. They placed him in standard steel handcuffs. They marched him through the polished marble lobby of his building, while his affluent neighbors watched in stunned silence. The investment broker who spent his entire life curating an image of untouchable success was placed into the back of an unmarked government vehicle. His hedge fund venture evaporated before it ever legally opened. The borrowed prestige he used to intimidate others was replaced by the harsh reality of a federal indictment. While Spencer was being processed in a federal holding facility, the second wave of devastation struck Vivian. Arthur Kensington and the executives at Vanguard Coastal Bank were fighting to save their own institutional charter. The bank faced severe penalties for pushing a fraudulent loan through underwriting without proper due diligence. To demonstrate compliance to the federal regulators, the bank took immediate and ruthless action against my family. The bank initiated a global freeze on every financial account linked to Vivian and Spencer. They locked the checking accounts, the savings portfolios, and the mutual funds. They seized the remaining capital to begin recouping the stolen $2 million. Vivian discovered this reality at noon on Monday. She attempted to purchase a costly floral arrangement for the estate using her primary platinum card. The transaction was declined. She presented a second card. That transaction was also declined. My mother possessed a closet full of designer gowns and a driveway featuring luxury vehicles, but she suddenly lacked the liquidity to purchase a cup of coffee. The bank had severed her financial lifeline. The wealth she assumed she controlled was trapped behind impenetrable red tape. The destruction spread quickly to Manhattan to consume Audrey. My sister built her entire identity on the currency of reputation. In the public relations industry, your social standing is your only true asset. The society blogs and financial news outlets published detailed accounts of the charity gala debacle by Monday afternoon. The articles highlighted the forged signatures and the stolen estate funds. Audrey had attached her name to the event, proudly standing on stage alongside the criminals. The senior partners at her boutique firm convened an emergency board meeting. They did not invite Audrey to participate. Her clients were already calling the office demanding to sever ties to avoid the toxic publicity. Public relations firms exist to clean up scandals, not to host them. When Audrey arrived at her corner office, the partners presented her with a binding separation agreement. They stripped her of her equity and terminated her partnership effective immediately. They ordered security to escort her out of the glass tower before she could even pack her belongings. Audrey stood on the New York pavement holding a cardboard box. Her lucrative salary was gone. The Tribeca loft Vivian purchased for her carried exorbitant monthly maintenance fees. Without her income and without the family accounts to float her lifestyle, Audrey was staring at immediate eviction. The bridge loan she had begged me to co-sign was now a financial impossibility. She was exiled from the very industry she thought she ruled. Back in Connecticut, the final pillar of the Montgomery facade crumbled. High society is an ecosystem built on proximity to power and wealth. When a family loses both, the ecosystem purges them with breathtaking speed. The board of directors at the Greenwich Country Club held a quiet telephone conference on Tuesday morning. They did not grant Vivian a hearing. They did not ask for her side of the story. A uniformed courier arrived at the Montgomery estate just before lunch. He delivered a heavy cream envelope to Vivian. The envelope contained a prorated refund check for her annual dues and a brief formal letter stating her membership was revoked. The philanthropic organizations quietly scrubbed her name from their committee rosters. The women who drank her champagne on Saturday night sent her calls straight to voicemail by Tuesday afternoon. The silence of her former friends was total. Vivian was officially a ghost in her own town. I observed the fallout from the quiet sanctuary of my apartment. I did not visit the estate to gloat. I did not answer the frantic text messages from distant relatives seeking gossip. I sat at my workstation monitoring the legal updates from David Caldwell. I reviewed the formal transfer of the $14 million estate into my secured trust accounts. The wealth was safe. The legacy of my grandfather was protected. I felt no joy watching the destruction of my family. Joy implies a personal victory or a sense of vindictive triumph. I experienced none of that. I simply felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balanced ledger. They had built a towering house of cards using stolen money and forged documents. They expected the world to hold its breath, to keep their fragile structure standing. I did not build the house of cards. I simply turned on the fan. The math had finally corrected itself. The equations were solved. My grandfather trusted me to hold the line, and I held it with unyielding precision. The storm had ravaged the Gold Coast and left my secure servers untouched. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and watched the evening sun dip below the tree line. Then a sharp, frantic knock echoed against my apartment door, breaking the peaceful silence. The sound carried the distinct, desperate rhythm of someone who had run out of options. I checked the security camera feed on my monitor. The final confrontation had arrived at my threshold. The frantic knocking echoed through my small apartment, cutting through the quiet hum of my server tower. The sound carried a distinct, erratic rhythm. It was the desperate pounding of someone who had exhausted every other option and found themselves staring into a void. I walked to my workstation and accessed the security camera feed monitoring my front door. Vivian Montgomery stood in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hallway. She wore a plain gray trench coat over dark slacks. Her signature pearl choker was missing. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a haphazard knot rather than her usual salon-styled wave. The cosmetics that typically served as her armor were gone, revealing deep lines of stress etched around her mouth and eyes. She looked like a woman who had spent the last 48 hours speaking to federal defense attorneys and realizing none of them accepted social status as a retainer fee. I walked to the front door and disengaged the deadbolt. I turned the brass knob and pulled the door open, pausing when the gap reached 2 feet. I did not invite her inside. I stood in the threshold blocking her entry. My posture remained relaxed but firm. Vivian looked up at me. Her eyes were rimmed with red. The aristocratic arrogance that defined her entire existence had evaporated, leaving behind a fragile, brittle shell. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest. Her polished nails were chipped. "Clara," she whispered. The word carried a tremor. "Please." I said nothing. I waited for her to articulate her request. I knew exactly why she drove to my neighborhood. I knew what the banking freeze had accomplished. "Spencer is in a federal holding cell," she said, her voice breaking. "The prosecutors are denying bail. They claim he is a flight risk because of the offshore holding accounts. The defense lawyers are demanding $250,000 just to review his case file and begin a strategy. I went to the bank this morning. They turned me away. My cards are locked. The estate accounts are frozen. We have nothing left, Clara. They are going to send your brother to a federal penitentiary." She expected me to gasp. She expected the reality of a prison sentence to shock me into submission. She forgot that I calculated the sentencing guidelines the moment I discovered the forged commercial loan. I anticipated this exact outcome. "Wire fraud across state lines carries mandatory minimums," I replied, my voice even and quiet. Spencer made his choices when he forged the medical proxy and signed grandfather and his name. The federal government is simply balancing the ledger. Tears spilled over Vivian and her eyelashes and tracked down her cheeks. These were not the performative tears she shed at the cemetery for the society photographers. These were the tears of a woman watching her curated universe burn to ash. "He made a mistake," Vivian pleaded. She reached out and gripped the wooden doorframe. "We all make mistakes. We were just trying to protect the family. You have to understand that. We thought we were doing what was best for the Montgomery name. You were trying to protect your country club memberships and Audrey and her leased sports car," I corrected her. "You tried to steal $14 million from a dying man to cover your own financial incompetence. You can fix this," Vivian begged, leaning closer. "David Caldwell said you are the sole trustee. You control the funds. You can instruct the bank to release the capital. You can pay the legal retainers. You can drop the civil injunctions. We are your family, Clara. We share the same blood. You cannot just stand there and watch us lose everything." I looked at the woman standing in the hallway. I studied her desperate pleading expression. I remembered standing by the rose trellis holding a glass of iced water while she patted my shoulder and told the wives of state senators that I was a failure. I remembered her sitting in the formal dining room, threatening to destroy my career and have my security clearance revoked if I did not sign a waiver renouncing my own legacy. I remembered her rushing to demand a death certificate before my grandfather was even cold. She was invoking blood to save herself after spending 29 years treating me like an infection. You built a house of cards, I said. You financed your prestige with stolen money and fraudulent signatures. You thought your social standing made you immune to consequences. I simply provided the documentation to the people who care about facts. Vivian fell to her knees on the hallway carpet. The gesture was jarring. The proud matriarch of the Connecticut Gold Coast knelt on the cheap synthetic fibers of my apartment complex. She grabbed the hem of my dark shift dress. "Please, Clara," she sobbed. "I am begging you. He is your brother. I am your mother. Do not do this to us. Do not leave us with nothing." I stepped back, pulling the fabric of my dress from her grasp. I looked down at her weeping figure. I felt no urge to raise my voice. I felt no desire to inflict further pain. The boundary I was establishing was not an act of revenge, it was an act of preservation. "You introduced me as a disappointment," I told her. My words were measured and clear. "I am just living up to your expectations." I stepped back into the entryway. I closed the heavy wooden door, hearing the latch click into place. I engaged the deadbolt. I turned the secondary lock. The physical barrier slid home, finalizing the separation. I stood in the quiet hallway of my apartment and listened as Vivian wept on the other side of the door. Her sobs slowly faded as she realized the door would never open again. I heard her footsteps retreat down the stairwell. The following weeks moved with a steady, predictable rhythm. I took a brief leave of absence from my cybersecurity firm to manage the transition of the estate. I drove to Hartford and sat in the dark mahogany office belonging to David Caldwell. We spent hours reviewing the financial portfolios, the commercial real estate deeds, and the long-term investment accounts. David treated me with the quiet professional respect reserved for peers. He guided me through the legal paperwork required to formally register the irrevocable digital trust with the state and federal tax authorities. I signed the documents using a simple black pen. I did not require a lavish ceremony or a champagne toast to validate the moment. The transfer of $14 million occurred in a silent room accompanied only by the scratch of ink on paper. I did not purchase a luxury loft in Tribeca. I did not lease a high-performance sports car. I kept my modest second-floor apartment. I retained my job at the cybersecurity firm because I value the discipline of daily labor. The wealth my grandfather built was not a lottery ticket. It was a foundation designed to generate stability. I instructed David Caldwell to draft the incorporation papers for a new philanthropic entity. We named it the Wallace Montgomery Foundation. I allocated a substantial portion of the trust yields to fund the organization. The charter dictates that the foundation will provide full academic scholarships and professional grants to young women pursuing degrees in network security and digital forensics. My grandfather always valued the architect over the actor. He believed in people who understood how to build systems and protect foundations. He knew that the future belonged to those who could read the code and secure the data. By establishing this foundation, I ensure his philosophy endures. Every year, a new cohort of intelligent-driven women will receive the financial support they need to enter a demanding industry. They will learn how to trace anomalies and secure networks. They will learn how to rely on facts rather than appearances. As for the remaining members of my biological family, their descent continued without my intervention. Spencer remained in federal custody awaiting trial. His court-appointed attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution possessed an insurmountable mountain of digital evidence. The forged signature metadata and the bank server logs provided a pristine roadmap of his guilt. He faces a significant sentence in a minimum security federal prison. Audrey moved out of Manhattan. Without her public relations income and the family subsidies, she could not maintain the facade. She relocated to a small rental property in a different state, attempting to rebuild her life away from the scrutinizing glare of the society blogs. We do not speak. Vivian sold the grand estate in Greenwich to cover her mounting legal debts and civil penalties. The bank reclaimed the property, recovering their stolen $2 million during the liquidation sale. The towering oak trees, the stone fountain, and the formal dining room now belong to strangers. Vivian moved into a small condominium on the edge of the county. She lives quietly, avoiding the country club district and the philanthropic circles she once ruled. The social exile she feared more than anything else became her permanent reality. I sit in my ergonomic chair in my quiet apartment. The custom server tower hums gently in the corner of the room. The 3 monitors on my desk display the steady, secure flow of encrypted data. The biometric flash drive rests safely inside a fireproof safe in my closet. I pour a cup of black coffee and watch the evening light fade outside my window. I am a self-made woman. I paid my own debts. I earned my own clearance. I protected the only family member who truly saw me for who I am. My grandfather handed me a digital weapon and trusted me to hold the line against the people who wanted to erase his legacy. I held the line. I do not seek the approval of Gold Coast society. I do not care about garden parties or tailored linen suits. I understand that prestige is a fragile construct built on the shifting sands of public opinion. I prefer the immutable architecture of binary code. I possess the truth, and the truth is bulletproof.
In the quiet, meticulously manicured suburbs of America, where lawns are cut to exact specifications and driveway gravel crunches under the tires of luxury cars, a silent crisis often unfolds behind closed oak doors. We are culturally conditioned to believe that the traditional family structure is an impenetrable fortress, a place of unconditional shelter and unwavering support. But the story of the Montgomery family holds up a mirror to a much darker reality, reflecting the hidden fractures within a culture that frequently prioritizes prestige over emotional truth. It is a cautionary tale, certainly, but more importantly, it serves as a profound, urgent lesson in the architecture of raising children and the true meaning of family responsibility. When we examine the spectacular ruins of the Montgomery Empire, the first and most glaring fracture lies in how we measure success. Society, particularly in the hyper-competitive arenas of the American Gold Coast, often hands parents a deeply flawed yardstick. We are tempted, almost encouraged, to evaluate our children through the lens of external validation, elite university degrees, lucrative corporate titles, and proximity to influential social circles. We want our children to be living trophies we can present at garden parties and charity galas. Yet, as we witnessed with Spencer and Audrey, a life built entirely on outward prestige is nothing more than a fragile, hollow shell. True sustainable success does not stem from a title printed on heavy cardstock. It is forged in the quiet, unglamorous fires of professional competence, independent thought, and the rugged ability to stand on one's own feet. When parents impose the crushing weight of family reputation onto their children's shoulders, they do not create high achievers, they create terrified actors. Children taught that their primary value is to make the family look flawless will inevitably learn to lie, to borrow beyond their means, and to compromise their moral compass just to maintain the illusion. They will forge documents and burn through credit lines simply to avoid the unforgivable sin of looking ordinary. The pressure to conform to a wealthy ideal strips them of their authenticity, leaving them desperate and morally bankrupt. This dynamic leads directly into the deeply destructive habit of labeling and favoritism. Think of the holiday dinner tables where children are casually categorized before the appetizers are even served. Assigning roles: the successful one, the brilliant one. The disappointment creates a toxic competitive environment that poisons the very foundation of the home. The children branded as golden are handed an impossible, suffocating burden. They are forced to run on an endless treadmill of perfection, exhausting themselves, terrified that a single failure will cost them their parents' affection and approval. In their desperation not to fall from the pedestal, they become vulnerable to catastrophic ethical compromises. They break the law because they believe falling from grace is worse than committing a crime. Conversely, the child labeled the disappointment is pushed to the margins, stripped of familial connection, and left to navigate the world alone. Yet every individual operates on a unique developmental timeline. Emotional awareness in parenting demands that we respect these innate differences. A healthy family structure honors practical skills, logical thinking, and quiet resilience, even if those traits do not glitter at a high society gathering. Clara's strength lay in her digital precision, her logic, and her self-reliance traits. Her mother dismissed because they lacked traditional glamour. We must learn to see our children for who they are, fostering their individual strengths rather than punishing them for failing to be the aesthetic accessories we desired for our own social benefit. Furthermore, the Montgomery tragedy redefines the concept of parental love, distinguishing it sharply from enablement. There is a dangerous, pervasive misconception in modern parenting that loving a child means shielding them from the consequences of their actions. When a parent uses money, social leverage, and influence to constantly erase their children's mistakes, just as Vivian attempted to do to preserve her older children's status, they actively rob those children of the opportunity to grow up. They create eternal adolescents incapable of surviving the real world. True responsible parenting requires the courage to let a child fall. It requires allowing them to face the harsh, unyielding outcomes of their poor decisions so they can learn accountability and fairness. This courage extends to the establishment of healthy, unyielding boundaries. Bloodline is a biological fact. It is not a blank check for emotional extortion. We must teach our children that family is not a tool for manipulation, nor does it demand blind obedience at the cost of personal integrity. Respect within a home must be cultivated through honesty, fairness, and ethical behavior, not maintained through financial control or the constant threat of emotional blackmail. When boundaries are blurred, love turns into a mere transaction. Ultimately, the story asks us to consider what we are truly leaving behind for the next generation. The concept of legacy in American culture is too often reduced to the simple transfer of bank accounts, stock portfolios, and real estate deeds. But the greatest asset a parent can pass down is not wealth. It is the capacity and the character to protect and respect that wealth. Grandfather Wallace did not entrust his lifetime of labor to Clara because she was obedient or polished. He chose her because she was the only one equipped with the integrity, the discipline, and the precise skill set required to defend what he had built against those who would quickly squander it. We must guide our children to understand that a true family legacy resides in a steadfast work ethic, unyielding discipline, and undeniable honesty. Inherited money can be burned away in a single afternoon of poor judgment, but a fortified character endures the harshest of winters. The collapse of the Montgomery facade serves as a piercing warning. Families constructed on the shifting sands of pretense and social pressure will inevitably disintegrate when confronted with the cold, unforgiving light of reality. In contrast, individuals armed with survival skills, self-respect, and emotional clarity will remain standing long after the storm has passed. These are the quiet, brutal truths we explore here, peeling back the layers of societal expectation to reveal the core of human resilience. We tell the stories of those who refuse to be diminished, those who find their strength in the shadows, and those who demand that the ledger of justice be balanced with unwavering precision. If you find value in these reflections, if these narratives of survival boundaries and quiet reckoning resonate with your own journey, please follow the channel Orange Vengeance. We will continue to bring you stories that challenge the facades we build and celebrate the truth that sets us free. As you reflect on the legacy of the Montgomery family, take a moment to consider the dynamics within your own walls. Look at the chairs pulled up to your own dining table. We all carry the weight of expectations, the lingering echoes of the labels we were given in our youth, and the quiet, desperate yearning to be seen for who we truly are. Sometimes the most profound act of love is simply allowing a polished facade to fall. And as the dust settles and the silence fills the room, you are left with a lingering, uncomfortable question. If the flawless veneer of your own life were suddenly stripped away, what kind of foundation would be left standing in the dark?